This is Ken Orrock, and you're watching the Breaking It Down show.
Yeah, I was talking off mic with you. I love doing this. I call them spy versus spy episodes, but the SEALs do a great job of this. They do a great job of talking to folks and getting that trident out there. And people are like, "Yeah, I need to get a SEAL around here to help me out with my whatever it is," right? And we are reluctant to do that. And even within our groups, and I don't mean our group specifically that we were just talking about, but in general, like CIA agent groups, we're pretty hard on each other, because we don't have a trident or we have a badge, but no one cares about that badge. So we don't have those bona fides when you just show up and be like, oh, that's Pete. He's a badass special agent. We just sort of like kind of go, man, you probably done something, but probably not. Like we're not real friendly a lot of times. And we're also suspicious of everybody. So we make
Absolutely.
we're a weird group when we get together if it's kind of unchecked and you don't have enough person to person interaction. At least that's the way I see it.
No, I think you're right. We work in the shadows a good portion of our career, and most of us, we're. You asked me earlier for some photographs. Back in the day, we didn't take photographs back in the day.
Right.
We didn't want to be identified. When we're in theater, we wear sterile uniforms. It'll have a name on it, probably not our name. Won't probably have a rank
Yeah.
on it. Might be the U.S. pins, might be something else. It might be based on what we're doing that day.
Yeah.
We may wear a rank that's not ours because that's what's necessary to accomplish the mission. But we don't do a good job of selling ourselves. I think that those of us that have been around for a while, that are retired, that have lived through some of these different eras, it's good for us to speak out now,
Yeah.
especially because we're in a real exciting era of counterintelligence with the reformation of Army Counterintelligence Command, the 2025 National Security Defense Authorization Act that reorganized Army CI a lot, and also because I think in the post Vietnam era, a lot of
Mm.
us became, for lack of a better term, bastard stepchildren of military intelligence, and we were being led by people that weren't necessarily knowledgeable or
Yeah.
capable of leading us. And so we sort of insulated and went back into our shell a bit. And 9/11 changed all that.
It sure did in a lot of ways. And I know the current iteration of the movement is more towards the law enforcement, the special agent side of our work. That's not where I had the luxury of working. And I look at what we're doing there and I think, man, we always forget about this discipline. And I'm not going to talk about the tactical side a whole lot because I want to get into what you did, but we tend to lose sight of the challenge of, hey, it's usually like E3, E4, E5, soldier, you're going to attach unknown to this brigade or battalion, and you need to go get off the camp and build a network so you can find out what's going to happen. And maybe your warrant officer was a guy who's been strategic his whole career, and so he doesn't know to go off the camp every day, put himself in the dangerous area, or maybe he doesn't want to. And so
Sure.
we have these challenges of the law enforcement thing's critical, right? But our job is so diverse. I mean, you and I both know you can go do the electronic thing. You can go do I'm TDY and I'm going to go do these assessments or whatever it is and never touch any of our worlds because there are so many specific worlds that are ethereal. They appear and they're there for 5 years and gone. That job will never exist. It's
Right.
crazy how varied our jobs are. So
You
I
know, I
guess
had
talk
the
a little bit about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the privilege of talking to a young active agent last weekend. And one of the things I relayed to him is that, yeah, all this technology comes up. We have new threats. We identify these emerging threats. We know that the foreign intelligence services are always trying to get ahead of us in collection activities. But the bottom line is human intelligence hasn't changed. And
Yeah.
as CI guys, we're counter humaners first and foremost, because at the other end of all those systems collecting against us, there's still a human being. And
Yep.
so an understanding of human nature, an understanding of human frailty, human weakness, and
Mhm.
human pride and hubris have always been key elements to being a successful agent, whether you're working in a strategic environment or a tactical environment trying
Yeah.
to collect. And people that forget that and rely on the newest whiz bang G, this is my newest counter this collection thing, forget that when it comes right down to it, when everything else fails, it's a human being trying to collect against us that we're trying to counter.
Yeah. Man, that's such good stuff. I used to work in San Francisco, there's a lot of tech ads, and they would always talk about security. And I would always think, yeah, I hear that you got really good security, but all I need is a tight sweater, some tits, and I'm gonna find some way to get that password off of somebody,
Yeah,
because it's all exploitable. And the more I can find something that you want, the more I'm gonna succeed.
sure. The ability to elicit information by whatever means is most appropriate always works. I had the privilege of attending a class at one point in my career to be a treaty escort compliance agent. And though I never went on a mission, we were trained that if the Russians were sending people over to do a treaty compliance mission for one of our nuclear sites, we had to go ahead of time and make sure everything was ready, but also do the escorts. And there's very strict set time
Sure.
periods. They have to tell you within certain how many hours they're going to arrive, within certain how many hours of arrival, they tell you where they're going to go, etc. But we did an elicitation drill, and this was a joint class. We had non-military federal law enforcement, military intelligence, military law enforcement, all in this class. And one of the things they told us to do was to go out and gave us a list of things to elicit. And one of the things was somebody's bank account. And I was with a group of CI agents that weren't from the DC area, so I was giving them a tour, and we ended up walking in front of the White House, and we started chatting up a uniform Secret Service guy. And I played it off that we were all new in town, military guys. Hey, can you give me a good local bank? And he pulls out his checkbook, and while he's reading me off the name and address of the bank, I'm memorizing and transposing his account number from the bottom of his
Yeah.
check. That didn't go over real well with the Secret Service agents in the class the next day when I told them where I elicited it from. But it also goes to show that even somebody that's on the top of their edge, a razor's edge kind of guy guarding the White House, standing out front with a badge and a gun, can be manipulated if they don't see the collector as a threat against them. Whether it's the
Oh
woman
yeah.
in the tight sweater, or what I always found, especially in dealing with Army assets, walking around with a clipboard in your hand. If you had a clipboard in your hand, nobody ever questioned anything you did.
Man, there's so many of those things. Like if you walk around with a trash bag, no one wants to talk to you. They'll leave you alone. It's an invisibility cloak. Where's Turner going? Oh, he's got a trash bag. You know, but I don't see that guy. So there's all of these tools that are like that. I love that, man. And also, by the way, I like to say I like to put the illicit in elicitation. And so yeah, sometimes it's tits in a thing, but sometimes it's just simply just listening or looking for a reflective surface or just fucking asking the question. Hey,
Sure.
I've been tasked to get someone's bank account number. Can I have yours? I promise I won't write it down. I'll just remember it. And you might just solve the problem in 20 seconds.
Yeah, it goes back to that old adage we learned early on when recruiting sources to spot, assess, and recruit. And once
Yeah,
we've spotted somebody that has placement and access and those things that we're looking for, and we go into
yeah,
that assessment phase and we assess how can I make my approach? How can I get to this person? What is their strength? What is their weakness?
yeah,
And then we do all that and are prepared before we make an attempt. We never go in blind if we can help it at all, and try to
yeah.
recruit somebody without knowing everything we need to know ahead of time.
Yeah. You could say that again 100 ways, and every emerging or current agent should hear that and understand. You've got so many meetings you get to have with the person, especially before you pitch them. And so you have to do all of the work. You have to be precise and loose at the same time. When I taught source operations, and just by dumb luck, Ken, the Army didn't design this. I went and ran sources in Bosnia, and then I met a girl who was also in the Army, and she was signal, and they curtailed her orders to go to Huachuca to be in the signal unit there. And so we happened to get married, and they're like, you have to go with her. And so I got there, and then I ended up in the source operations course. That's how hard it is to actually get someone who's got active recent experience to go
Right.
teach there. The point here is this is meeting one. What do you need to figure out? Because by meeting three, you need to know why this guy wears white socks with purple hemmings on it, whatever it is. Like if you don't know that now, you still have to do the meeting one stuff. And now you've exposed yourself and your source for an extra meeting or two. And it's not that you have to do everything in every meeting, but you have to think, how do I get down this road? I've spotted, assessed. I want to get to recruit. What things do I have to have? Because by the way, for me to recruit, and I'm not trying to give any secrets here, someone above me has to approve that.
Right.
And so they're going to say, well, why don't you know what color hems that guy has on his socks?
Right. What the preparation is the key to anything, whether it's on the tactical side and running a tactical source, which I've done also, or on the strategic side, think how much work goes into before you'd even consider doing a subject interview and how
Yeah.
much you need to know everything ahead of time. So, proper preparation, having either the analytical support or the analytical skills
Mm.
yourself, which you must have to a certain extent too, to do that is all a foundational basis. This is not, says the guy wearing the hat, this is not a cowboy game. This is not a game where we just go out blindly and say, hey, I'm going to, necessarily go talk to that person because he's wearing this or he walked out of this building. I mean, you
Right.
have to do that sometimes. And sometimes there's some mission critical, priority intelligence requirements that you don't have the time to do that. But those are never as successful as a properly planned operation, either on the
Yeah.
tactical side or on the strategic side. And it all starts with doing your homework. But again, it goes back to what I said before. It also goes back to knowing human nature.
Yeah. Yeah. Human nature, we could study that over and over again and have to continue to do it because everything's balancing and there's no, you don't, let's see if I can say this well here. Everything is a balancing act and nobody's ever balanced. And so
Correct.
you're always like uneasy and you're trying to not look like you're doing this while you're doing this. And it's dangerous, but you have to be in danger, right? And all
Right.
these things that you have to balance at the same time, it is overwhelming. We develop, I think, when we're active and we have access to becoming great, which is not a reliable thing, we have the ability to do way more than I would have to even bother doing now. Like I don't have to remember whole sections of conversation. Am I 100% accurate? No, but I'm like 90 plus, and so I could write down 250 words verbatim or close to it. I don't have to do that anymore. So we develop this mastery of all of these skills. Yet the entire time we're on the edge of like, am I doing this right? And I always love to ask this question. I'm about to shut up here. Who's running who? Because you
Yeah.
should be on that edge where you're like you're so runnable that they're trying to also potentially run you if you're in that kind of a world.
And that's exactly where I was about to go before you said it, because you talked about the danger. You talked about always being on edge. There are events that have occurred in the last century in the Cold War that showed us just how vulnerable sometimes we were. That was operating. I mean, there's
Yeah.
a publicly available report out there on a black swan incident in Germany where a surveillance team had been running surveillance on a couple of identified collectors against the army, and in the end, it turned out the whole thing was a counter surveillance operation to test what the army's capabilities were, and it
Mm.
almost ended up in agents being kidnapped or worse when that foreign intelligence service revealed itself at the end of that operation. And I don't think at any given time in reading the after action reports of this, and this is something that happened in, I believe, in the 70s or early 80s, that those agents had any idea that they were the
Yeah.
target. They thought they were the hunters. They were out there hunting. They were out
Hmm.
there surveilling. They'd been doing this for months, but in fact, that whole time they were the prey and didn't know it. So staying on edge and asking that question, who's running who's being
Yeah.
worked against here, it always has to be in your mind.
I ran across a CI team in Afghanistan, hard place in Afghanistan, and they were running around the countryside. And I'm going to be critical of these guys because they deserve it. They had a warrant officer, NCO, and then a lower enlisted guy, and they were running around and doing screenings with their screening robot, and they were suggesting termination for every one of them because they were all tied to the Taliban. Man, and I was at the time I was working in um, a contract capacity, and so I found these guys, and they were always gone, and I'm like, "What are you guys doing? Why are you doing that?" And they're like, "Well, these guys are tied to the Taliban." I'm like, "Motherfucker, this is Taliban country. These
Right.
guys are all, of course." What you're supposed to be doing is identifying these guys, getting them jobs on camp, and flipping them. That's what you're supposed to be doing. They looked at me like I was crazy. And it's
Yeah.
not always possible to do these things, but they just wanted to get them off the camp, and they were worried about the on-camp threat. But we've all been here forever. They can be uphill from us, and they can see where the fuel farm is. You're not going to hide where we are. You're not going to hide our operations.
They don't need
And
to pace off the mortar ranges anymore. They have a little
right.
laser that can do that. We don't have to have them in the camp. But the baseline of counterintelligence, and I heard a lot of buzzwords last weekend when we had these newer leaders in counterintelligence and guys that had come up,
Yeah.
through the years in Afghanistan, and they had these 5
Hmm.
sentence long buzzword statements to go back to what the mission is. And the mission
Right.
is and has always been identify, neutralize, or exploit. And
Right.
too many times people, especially, and I think this is sort of the tension that you're talking about now with the additional law enforcement authorities, which aren't additional law enforcement authorities, very few. It all existed. 38120
Right.
had all that before. But they want to go to the neutralize so quickly because the neutralize is a guarantee. It's an
Right.
easy. I'm going to get this person out of this position. I'm going to arrest this person. I'm going to bring charges against this person. The artwork comes in the exploit, in the
Yeah.
exploitation. And you can always neutralize, but you have a very limited window to exploit and utilize those types of things. So I think that tension existed previously. It'll continue to exist. And it comes down to proper leadership to understand, hey, we are still with one foot firmly planted in the intel community, even though the other foot is firmly planted in the law enforcement community. And we can probably do better for our nation, for our unit, for our command by exploiting before we pull that trigger on neutralization. So
Yeah.
the mission hasn't changed. The verbiage has changed. We can say it in fancy ways now, but I've
Yeah.
saw the same things. And sort of circle back something you said before.
Mm.
Very seldom in my career was I dealing with a good guy with a white hat when I was collecting. I wasn't going to get the information I needed from the good
Yeah.
guy wearing the white hat. Uh,
Yeah.
I've sat across the table from a Bosnian Serb police chief who I know this guy's a genocidal maniac. I know this guy
Right.
has probably put the bullet in the back of the head of women and children, but he has the placement and access to the information I need to support the
Hmm.
S4 commander. And so I'm going to sit across the table from him and I'm going to elicit information. I'm going to play my part in the game,
Yeah.
knowing that this is a person that I just assumed did not exist in this world anymore because he is pure evil. The
Yeah.
the the person down the street that is a good person that's never done anything wrong is probably not the person that I'm going to be able to collect from with
Right.
the level of information and specificity I need to affect change, to
Yeah.
conduct a force protection source operation, to advise the commander of what may be planned in retaliation for the next move, and those kinds of things. So
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I think that we can't, and that's again goes back to that having one foot firmly planted in both worlds. The
Yeah.
law enforcement officer in me, and having been a career law enforcement officer in and out of the military, bad guys go to jail. The
Yeah.
intelligence operative in me says bad guys can get me to where I need to go or get me the
Hell
information
yeah. Right.
I need to protect my fellow soldiers, to protect those innocents.
Balance. Right. That
Balance,
imbalance
balance.
constantly. Yeah. And I'm a tactical guy to the core, and overt is fine with me because I learned those skills. And so I can think about the time when I really earned my self-awarded black belt at CI TAC collection in the field. I got great at it because I stayed proximate to the ground. I was always able to get off the camp. And so I just worked my way through all of my mistakes and I learned what was important. I learned it wasn't important. And I'll say things that are absolutely not doctrinal. Like, I don't give a fuck what your information requirements are, your PIRs. I'm going to answer those, but you're a precious little baby if you think you're going to tell me that, oh, we need you to find out where the bombs are. Of course, I know all that shit. But what you don't know and what I can find out and who I can introduce you to is wildly more important to the boss than this other stuff that we're milling around about. And by the way, the worst way to find out where the bad guys, where the bombs are in town is to walk around town going, where are the bombs? Where are the
Yeah.
bombs? You know what I mean?
No, I
So
used to
yeah,
use the acronym a lot, or the adage that, my job in working under the, auspices of, oh, I'm part of the S4 planning department,
Mhm.
or whatever happened to be in Bosnia, is it was just as important to let the commander know if the price of bread doubles, this
Right.
is going to be the reaction of the local community, as it was to tell him this guy doesn't like S4, this guy doesn't like Bosnia here, because the price of bread doubling could
Yeah.
have an adverse effect that has a ripple across the whole force. And the commander needs to know that just as much as he has to know
Yeah.
that Svenik over here doesn't like S4 driving down his road in those white Toyota Land Cruisers all the time, and doing those things. So, yeah,
Yeah.
having your ear to the ground, being out in the community. And I'll tell you, a disadvantage in operating as an American in those environments. Sometimes dealing with certain groups, it was an advantage being an American and overtly
Mhm.
being American. There were certain groups, and you and I can fall back to things that happened in the Balkans. For example, a lot of times the Croatians might like Americans. The Croatians liked the Germans because the history in the World War II, but they didn't like others. And I had the privilege of serving on a NATO team when I was there, and being able to shape the contact team by nationality, vis-a-vis, I'm an American, so you have to talk to the Americans. If it
Right.
was more prudent for the Dutch agent on my team to make the approach or to take the lead, or more prudent for the Belgian agent or the Spanish agent or the German agent, then we were able to do that and adapt to it, because we all know, which most Americans still refuse to realize, that not everybody thinks like us.
Yeah.
Not
Yeah.
everybody likes us.
Oof.
There's plenty of animosity out there towards the Americans. And sometimes they actually like to see the American in a subservient role to another nation. We don't like that.
Yeah.
We go
Yeah.
back to World War I, and no, U.S. troops will never serve under a foreign commander. Um, so there's some real interest in that. And to me, obviously, there are times when things have to stay within our American channels.
Sure.
But I
Yeah.
would tell you, on the tactical side, having worked, both, um, sometimes somebody's more willing to tell that big Dutch guy that can pound rock you shot for shot with him at the table,
Yep.
more than they're going to tell the American sitting there with his buzz cut in BDUs, um, because
Yeah. Yeah.
because they're not the big bad wolf out there. Who's offended by the Dutch?
Yeah.
Who's offended
Yeah.
by the Belgians other than the Congolese?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's an interesting world out there.
It is. It is. And you're saying a lot of great things that even though we've had different careers, like you get a lot of what I'm getting. And again, put a third agent in here, a totally different opinion and everything else. This is such interesting. I'm curious, when do you think you earned your black belt? Self-awarded, or maybe someone else was like, hey, you're good at this, kid. Whatever it is. But how long did it take? And talk a little bit about that time when you're like, actually, I'm pretty badass about this.
Well, when you come out, and I had a different kind of career. Way my career started off, and where I thought I was going
Hmm.
changed real quickly. I was recruited in the schoolhouse. Well, let me back up a little before. I was in law enforcement for many years before I went into counterintelligence. I
Right.
was in my mid 20s before I went in the Army. I had guys in basic training coming up to me and asking how to fill out their first tax return because they've never paid taxes before,
Right.
because they were so young. And so I had a little bit different background coming in, having been in law enforcement, having worked on the US Mexico border as a deputy, having worked in a jail, and learning human nature in a jail, which is a good place, a controlled study of individuals. So when I came into the Army, I sort of had a different background than a lot, not all. There were other former law enforcement guys in my CISAC class. Um, so when I'm in the schoolhouse one day, it was sort of interesting. I had no idea what I was going to do. I was still learning about counterintelligence, and they were simultaneously running the counterintelligence officers basic course.
Mm.
And the instructor came in and said, "Hey, there's a captain from the course next door wants to come in and speak to all you guys." So this guy came in, and he said, and he came in wearing the beret. He had his maroon beret on and his airborne wings. He'd obviously been around a while. And he said, hey, is anybody out there an ex-cop? And several of us raised our hands, or about two or three of us, I guess. And he said, okay, hey, everybody else, you can go. And then he looked at us all and said, any of you speak Spanish?
Mm.
Two of us raised our head, my guy and a guy that was a cop out of South Florida. And he said, hey, can I talk to you guys outside? We went for a walk, and he said, look, I'm with 7th Group. I'm going back. I'm forming a CI team to support counter narcotics operations in
Wow.
South America. Would you guys be interested in that? And I said, sure. He said,
Yeah.
okay, and gave me instructions, and I'm come down on orders for airborne school and everything. And so that's where I thought I was going. I'm going to go, run, bump, and jump in the jungle. We're going to be, protecting these operators that are doing counter narcotic stuff. I'd come up as a cop in the late 80s and early 90s. I was very well aware of what was happening in Central and South America with the narcotics trade. And I'm like, this is a good fit for me. Feels good. Well, then on the Saturday or the Friday run of the second week airborne school, one moment I was running, and the next minute I woke up in the back of a pickup truck bouncing off the gravel field, and I spent the next month in the hospital. I had a rare form of heat stroke called exertional rhabdomyolysis. I was a sick puppy. Basically, I was on a dead man's profile for a year after that.
Oh
So
my God.
no more airborne wings, no more 7th Group at this point in time. And as a twist of fate, when I got out of the hospital and got off convalescent leave, I couldn't do all the things they wanted me to do as a casual guy stuck at the airborne holding company. I was on a dead man's profile. I couldn't go pick up parachutes. I couldn't go do all these other things.
Yeah.
And so they finally got so frustrated with me, they said, go find yourself a job. Okay. So found out where's the counterintelligence office here on base. I mean, the
Yes.
CI in the early mid 90s was not a huge field. There were
Right.
not the thousands of agents there are now. You knew, so if you didn't know the person, you knew somebody that knew the person. It was that
Yes.
tight a community. So I found the 308th field office there, and I went in. I knocked on the door, and this guy answers the door, and I don't know if he thought I was a walk-in or what it was, but I'm like,
Yeah.
hey, this is me. This is my story. And he said, you know what? I'm supposed to have 3 agents here. I only have one, me. Everybody else is deployed or out. Can you do SAIDA briefs?
Wow.
Yeah, I can do a SAIDA brief. And so I spent the next month or two tagging along with this guy. I didn't have my B's and C's yet or anything else.
Yeah.
Doing SAIDA briefs and going with him as he supported all these different units at Fort Benning. And then I had this huge fiasco with coming down on orders and trying to send me places that I couldn't go because of my profile and because I couldn't wear
Right.
gear for a year. And so the next thing, by a twist of fate, call back to the schoolhouse again, knowing people that know people. I'm speaking to my branch manager as a private, something privates don't normally do. And he asked me, where do you want?
Right. Yeah.
I have a vote in this where I go? Well, I'd love just to stay here and help out in the CI office here at Benning. The guy's by himself. He goes, well, I can't assign you there, but I'll send you to Fort Meade, and I'll let them know that's where you want to go. We'll get you orders up to Fort Meade. So I got up to Fort Meade and didn't know what I was really getting into. And next thing I know, here I am assigned to 308 MI and the old 902nd MI and the Fort Meade field office. And I'm doing, they decided to keep me there at the flagpole because of my profile and because of the proximity to medical and all the other stuff there.
Yeah. Fair. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. And so that sort of started that career path, which was sort of different, not where I wanted to go. So cut my teeth at 308. That was interesting. Did a lot of CONUS missions and support, did a lot of stuff in Military District of Washington, ended up being the badge and credential custodian for the entire 308 MI as a specialist. I had the largest BNC account in the whole Army and trying to keep track of badges and credentials spread across, the entire area of operations for CONUS. I learned a lot. But I wasn't real happy with the way things were going. I was feeling constricted. I had been offered to go to FCA to fly as the observer on the aircraft, and my non-CI sergeant major would not release me. I'm like, Hey, I'm going to be an agent. I'm going to be on flight status. I'm going to get my air crew wings. I'm going to get
Right.
that extra pay. And she wouldn't let me go. So I applied to go over to CID, having the background that I did, and went through the
Sure.
whole interview, got accepted, and my branch manager wouldn't release me.
Oh
And
my
instead,
God.
he threw me this bone. And this bone was, hey, we're going to send the first agent ever, U.S. agent, permanently assign them to the Allied Command Europe Rapid Reaction Corps
Oh
Joint
my God.
Counterintelligence Section.
Oh my God.
What does that mean? What
Yeah.
is that? And I found a guy there at Fort Meade that had been 650th MI supporting NATO. And I went over and talked to him. He was in the old counter surreptitious entry course instructor. And he said, oh, that's great. I know everybody you're going to be working with. We support them, but we've never had an agent in place there. So I'm like, that's a good idea. I had a 1 year old and my wife there at Fort Meade, and we come down on orders to go to Rheindau in Germany. Where the
Okay.
heck is Rheindau in Germany? It's nowhere near any place else any other Americans are. So it's a British framework, a NATO headquarters in northwest Germany, about 45 miles from the Dutch border. And I show up, and there's a whole 32 Americans at this Corps headquarters. Of that 32 Americans, there's only 11 enlisted, and I was a E5 when I got there. And of those 11 enlisted, there were only 3 NCOs. Myself, another E5 that got there at the same time, that was a combat engineer, and our first sergeant who ran the map shop for the Corps. And then we had 22 officers, all of them pretty senior, all the way up to a 1-star that was the Corps G2, G3. So I got there in the late 90s, and I'll tell you, it was heaven. I
Yeah.
enjoyed it. My boss was a Dutch major. My XO was a
The
German
best.
captain. The NCOIC was a British Warrant Officer 1, which is the OR9 rank, or the equivalent to our Sergeant Major. And then the team were Dutch. I had a Dutch agent, a Belgian agent, a Spanish agent, a German TSCM tech, and me. And that was the Joint Counterintelligence Section, which dated back into the earliest days of NATO. This unit had existed, and even though the Corps had overcome or many name changes. So there were a lot of good things I was looking forward to, and I started trying to apply some of those lessons I'd learned at 902nd that didn't necessarily fit, again, more in the sort of the overt role, the preventive role. And
Right.
all of a sudden now I'm going to be a theater level Corps asset, and have to protect this Corps headquarters, but at the same time be on initial entry teams. And this unit had been S41 during my time there, K41, first units into Kosovo. So you know what kind of Wild West environment you walk into when you're on an initial entry team for a U.S. or a NATO deployment. So I think that's where I started hitting my stride. Back to your
Yeah.
question. I had a Spanish agent who had been a Spanish Special Forces guy. His desk was right next to mine.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is great. I'm going to be able to practice my Spanish. And I kept speaking to him in Spanish. And after about a week or two, he put his hand on his ears and he started swaying. Stop, stop. Your ugly Mexican Spanish is hurting my ears. Proper Castilian speaker and everything else.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn Dutch.
Yeah.
I'm going to learn German. Nah, they all spoke American to me. And some of them spoke better English than I did. So,
Yeah.
but working in that international team,
Oh,
learning techniques from
yeah.
uh,
Yes.
other countries, learning to navigate around a very structured British framework, which was
Mhm.
challenging. But I learned a lot from the Brits too. These guys had operated primarily in Northern Ireland for decades. The counterintelligence operatives, as they called them, that I worked with, were some of the most squared away agents that I worked with over my career on the British side. They were the only guys in the British Army without full sleeve tattoos and everything else
Mm.
because they wanted to stay under the radar.
Yeah.
So I had a master's course in the IRA and the threats posed. Um, when I got there, the Corps commander was Sir Michael Jackson. And Iron Mike, as he was known, was actually a para officer, and he was one of the company commanders on the ground during Bloody Sunday in Northern
Mm.
Ireland. So talk about having threat against your commander. The
Yeah.
IRA had a price on his head.
Right.
He went on to be the chief of staff of the entire British Armed Forces. So it was very interesting to work with somebody at that level.
What an experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
And
incredible.
so, the other wonderful part of that, where I started, hitting my stride, is they have that old medical adage to watch one, do one, teach one. And
Mhm.
that was the first chance I really got to start teaching
Yeah.
counterintelligence.
Yeah.
Uh, we had several courses we ran throughout the year where we trained new agents from NATO countries how to integrate into a NATO framework unit, how to go work at the Allied Military Intelligence,
Yes.
how to go work at K4 headquarters, how to do these things. And so, starting that, I've watched one, I've done it,
Mhm.
and now I'm teaching it, I think is where I started hitting my stride in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
One of the things I sort of became a master at in that I really enjoyed was the role playing and
Oh,
doing
yeah.
scenario training. And some of the funniest experiences I had in my entire time in the Army revolved around role playing, whether my role was as in a sort of a Red Force kind of position where I was playing the bad guy, or whether my role was in playing a walk-in and teaching people how to deal with a walk-in and you know helping them to learn from mistakes in training
Mhm.
so that they didn't bleed in combat and make those same mistakes, like making sure your walk-in isn't armed before he
Yeah.
and sitting.
Yeah.
And I can remember, vividly sitting at the AMIB headquarters in Bosnia, role playing a position. And at one point, I had an unbuttoned shirt with a T-shirt underneath, and I sat back and I went like this, and all of a sudden, there's my shoulder holster popping out, and
Yeah.
the eyes on these three Norwegian agents just got as big as saucers. And you have a gun? Well, yes, I have a gun. Don't you have a gun?
Yeah.
And learning those kinds of things. So I think that's where I hit the stride.
Yeah.
Um, again, it resulted in some of the funniest stories I've got. Um, I remember vividly uh, sitting at doing role playing for new agents coming into the AMIB, and this U.S. Marine lieutenant colonel that was coming in, and he was going to be the CI commander, I think, up in Tuzla or someplace like that.
Mhm.
And he and his team were supposed to do a meet with us, and we were at one of the restaurants at Camp Bootmere, and we were playing pool, and we watched them come in, and they spent 5 minutes rearranging the furniture so it was how they wanted it for their interview, and moving
Yeah.
stuff around. And they almost got it done, and I'm watching them moving couches, moving chairs, and I looked at my partner and I said, come on, let's go. And we walked out, you
Yeah.
know after they'd done all this stuff and set up, and I forced them to do the meet in an environment that they didn't think they had
Right
control.
there. That's
Yeah.
it. Right there. Yeah.
And matter of fact, sitting out on the wooden deck that collapsed a couple of months later out there when they were doing the Sheryl Crow concert in Syria.
Mhm.
So those kinds of things. And the funny part of that is that we didn't interact with these agents while they were in training, and we stayed in role and we stayed separate from them. And I can remember walking into their graduation dinner, and this Marine lieutenant colonel, and I'm sure you've worked with Marines over the years, he stood up from the table when I walked in and pointed his finger at me, and you son of a bitch. And I'm like, all right, here
Yes.
we go.
I knew he was gonna say son of a bitch.
Yeah. And then he looks at me and goes, get over here. I'm going to buy you a beer, you
Yeah.
know, because he
Yeah.
realized that the more you bleed in training, the less you bleed in combat.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
learn these things and do it. So
It's so
I
true.
think that's where I hit my stride. And I think I carried that over. I was, when I was there on 9/11, I was at the Allied Rapid Reaction Corps headquarters. I was in the intelligence talk at the Corps headquarters. Uh, I was already on orders to go to 66 MI's Benelux Mid. I picked up the phone. I called the ops officer over there, who was a MICEP. I'd worked with him previously at Fort Meade when he was still an active duty agent. Uh,
Yeah.
Both historian buffs, and we're talking about this plane that hit the World Trade Center. This is after the first plane. And we're
Yeah.
both history buffs. We both study history, and we're talking about We both knew that a B-25 had hit the
Yep.
Empire State Building during
Yep.
World War II. And the second plane went in. And
Yep.
we, for a second, we're both, is that a replay of the first or what's going on? I mean, this is late morning, early afternoon in Germany as this is happening. Yeah. And we both said, gotta go, hung up the phone, and we knew our lives changed right then and there. We knew that nothing was going to be the same.
Yeah. So first off, so many similar things, it's crazy. When 9/11 happened, I was selling computers for a company called CDW, and I'm on the phone making my money. But, because I wasn't really going to be an agent anymore. But I had come back into the military via the reserve because I was like, oh, you know what? I'm going to. And so, I had just gotten back in and I'm in a transportation unit. They're going to get me over to Intel at some point. But right now, because it's the Army being funny, like, oh, you're an agent. You like to come back. Well, there's no way to do that directly. And I'm like, come on, man. We know that there is, but that's fine because right across the courtyard was the Intel unit. I was already working on transitioning over. That first plane hit, I thought about that bomber, and I'm like, oh, that happens sometimes. And I think Corey Lytle also had right on that time had flown his planes, baseball player, into a building. It happens. That second one hit, took the phone up. People were screaming on the phone. Put the phone down, went to see my boss. I'm like, I've got another place to be. He knew I was in the reserves, and I immediately reported to I was the first guy to get there because I lived just down the street from the thing. But I knew my life had changed, and that was going to be it. And I was going to go back in anyhow, right? Like I was already there, but it changed my approach to what was next. I applied to the CIA and all those things. And then, whatever, years later, I finally got done working and doing all that stuff. But yeah, so much of your stories is similar to mine. And that black belt status, that just unlocks the next level things where you start to, at least in my world, I start to look back and I go, oh, I'm the walk-in. Oh, they're also my commander. And if I think you'll get this. I became the placement and access because I can move around. And once they started introducing me inside their circle, so I meet the warlords, I meet the genocidal crazy people that I have to meet. And they start to go, hey, Pete's a cool dude. You guys need to talk to him. And I started learning how to get massive influence where I was meeting people that no one else could meet because they were locked into their day-to-day operational cycle. And I could work outside of that.
Sure.
The other big thing I learned was all that stuff like how do you work with K-Force? How do you work with AMID? How do you work with all these things? I learned how to speak commander so that I could show up and I wouldn't get trapped in the map room, in the talk or whatever. And I would say to these guys, like, there's 3 different kinds of counterintelligence agents. This is just for me useful in the field. There's analysts, there's planners, and there's Pete. Pete goes out and Pete gets you information that nobody else will get. We'll be at the same meeting. You'll be like, where did you get all this information? You're going to give me access and I'm going to pay off with this incredible information. And I had this thing, and I'm positive these things are going to resonate with you, Ken. I would say, while everybody else is looking in the field for a needle in a haystack, I'm going to go 2 fields over and I'm just going to scoop up the needles that are on the ground. And when you get sick of that information, I will go to the next field and I will find you more needles because no one's going to out collect me. No one's going to outwork me. And I'm going to make a difference in this battalion, so much so that you look at me in 3 months and you're like, you're our number 1 force multiplier. We couldn't do it. You don't have to say that because we already know you're going to say it. And then you're going to point at your couch. You're going to say, Pete, come sit down and talk to me whenever you have a question. And you and I are going to work together. And these commanders would be like, who? What? And then they would turn me loose. And then 3 months later, they'd look at me and I'd be like, I already know, man. I'd sit down, because I had done it so often, so well. I knew how to manage a sergeant major. I knew how to manage a staff. I still got in trouble a lot because what we do causes people discomfort. But I knew how to go out into that environment and reliably pull things out. And I knew how to matter outside as well as inside. So I wanted, one of my KPIs was to have someone from the 2, because I'm always nice to those guys. And they come running up, Pete, they know who you are. And they want to kill you. And I'm like, yes, I'm in the game. I matter, right? I'm making a difference. Yeah, motherfuckers, let's play the game. Because my friends are more dangerous than your friends. So let's get it on,
Yeah, I think you touched on 2 really important points. The first one, when you talk about networking and what we might call in the business liaisoning and creating liaison contacts. The time to create a liaison contact is not when you need them. The time to put them in your back pocket and have them ready for where you go. And that liaison at the basis level, is what allows you to move in these other circles or allows you to get that introduction to where you need. Um,
Yeah.
and as an example on that, I was detached from my role as the ASAC at the Benelux Mid and sent up to the ports as Northern European ports as we were going to push First Armor and First Infantry out of Germany to go down to Iraq. And I get up there and I had very strong liaison with the Koninklijke Marechaussee, or the KMAR, which was the Dutch Royal Military Police. They were a separate fifth armed force within the Dutch military, but also had a civilian role as sort of their border patrol, protecting the Queen, protecting the airports, and protecting the ports, with the exception of Rotterdam. Rotterdam had its own police force. And I had no contacts up there because I didn't need to. But I could call back to my KMAR guy and say, hey, Evo, who do I need to see at Rotterdam Port Police? Oh, I've got the guy for you. And now my bona fides are already bolstered because, my introduction is from a trusted person to a trusted person.
Yeah.
And you have Dutch law enforcement telling Dutch law enforcement, this guy's on our side, this guy's on our team, support him. The other thing I thought you said that was interesting is, the nature of my career was to work in purple environments too. And for those that don't understand a purple environment, it means, not just green, not just Army guys, but I was working with Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. I worked with Coast Guard. So I actually worked with the Merchant Marine during that point in time. So being able to be at least conversational in their languages, I say that I have a working fluency in Navy. I have a working fluency in Air Force.
Yes.
You put enough crayons in me, I can speak Marine.
Right.
And I could speak with the merchant mariners, which became an important part of my job when we were running those port operations in 2003, because one of my jobs was to go on board these merchant marine crewed USNS ships and debrief them about their crossing and brief them to the security situation in the port, and then provide them with updated information before they departed to take these troops down to the sandbox. So being able to speak their language, allowed me to gather the information to accomplish my message. I can tell, read other ranks from the other services. I know what their ranks are. I don't make a mistake, and call a Navy lieutenant captain because he's got railroad tracks on his, collar points. So those were all things that were really advantageous to me over my career, and the willingness to do that, which I think is ACI in its current iteration is getting the opportunity to do that more and more, because more ACI agents are being assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Forces. They're interacting with the different federal agencies. Those of us that worked OCONUS had the opportunity to work with NCIS, to work with OSI. Oftentimes they might call us and ask us, hey, can you do this follow-up for us because we don't have any assets here, or our assets are 3-4 hours away. Would you be willing to do this? Particularly in my case with OSI and NCIS, they did not have a presence in the Benelux. So I might get a call from Spangdahlem, I might get a call from London and say, hey, can you do that? Might be something, something on a PSI that I tasked one of my agents to, hey, go interview this person. We'll get this over to NCIS because they're doing this PSI. But it might be, hey, does this guy really come up here on his weekends? Can you tie in that? Obviously, that was a challenge in the Netherlands because a lot of U.S. service members, especially those that were drug seeking, would come to the Netherlands on their weekends because of the easy ability to obtain drugs. So those were always good things. And I developed a certain amount of admiration and jealousy for our partners in military counterintelligence with NCIS and OSI. And the reason for that was, which is starting to work a little more towards our advantage now, is those guys would keep their damn criminal hats on as long as they could, so that they didn't have to deal with 12333. They didn't have to file procedures. They didn't have to. oh, I'm doing a criminal investigation. And it
Yeah.
wasn't till that point where they could no longer deny that they were running a CI operation that suddenly they'd say, oh no, I have my intel hat on.
Oh boy. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there was some admiration in how they did that. With the change now and the enhanced law enforcement authorities of ACI,
Yeah.
most people don't realize that as Army guys, we were split.
Yeah.
Air Force has NCIS, criminal and counterintel. I mean, the Navy, OSI, Air Force, counterintelligence, criminal. In its infinite wisdom, at a point in time, the Army said we're separating these two. Um, and because we don't, back to what we started talking about, publicize ourselves in the same way, because oftentimes another three-letter agency comes in and takes the credit for our
Yeah.
cases and our glory, especially CONUS, where you might have, the FBI coming in and exerting their primacy, and through the U.S. attorney and stuff taking all the credit. We were a background agency. We might do all that work that led up to that neutralization, to that indictment, to that arrest, but
Mm.
very seldom did we get the credit for it. So
Yeah.
that multi-language literacy of being able to work amongst the different militaries and amongst the different federal agencies will make you a more successful agent, as you saw in your career.
Yeah, man, and anybody who wants to be an agent or is an agent currently, there's a ton of smart stuff in this because, yeah, I can talk about how like I'm going to make a difference for a commander. Keep in mind, I had my black belt at this point. I knew what commanders wanted. I could walk into any commander's office, tactical, and say, you have a foreign line mission plan. It's protect the force, it's close and destroy the enemy. It's enable your enablers and teach and train the local assets. And they're like, all right, yeah, you know my job, and that already, and I didn't say it like that. I said it, in a way that makes sense. If you
Right.
don't know how to turn that into where you can help them specifically accomplish their mission, you don't have a black belt yet. Work on that, figure out how to do that. And when someone tries to capture you, it happens all the time in our field because they know no commander reliably, you're not going to meet commanders who know how to drive a CI agent. So it's on us to understand what that is. You're not born with that. You have to develop it. And hopefully you get mentored into that. It's one of the reasons why I do the show, is to help us understand you have to be relevant. You can write all the reports you want. If no one's reading them, you're not relevant. And
Right.
and we are bad at that. We are bad. Like, oh, my intel's the best. Well, who's using it? How are you impacting this unit's ability to do its job, or whoever it's going to be, however your mission is laid out? You
Right.
have to be relevant. You have to already have the liaison. I'll tell a real quick story. I'm going to shut up and let you comment on all this stuff. But when I was working on the contract side in Iraq, we went up and saw the C2X. Hey, we're here. We're going to support your CI team. There isn't one there. Don't worry about it. We're good at what we do. And so we did that, and we gave him a bottle, and that bottle had alcohol in it. And that guy was Aussie, and he was wearing shorts. So he was under orders. He said, like, I'm under orders to not get killed. So I love you guys being out there. If you ever need anything, I am bored to tears here. Would love to come help you out. And so units rotate, rules, relationships are changing all the time because it's combat. We were on a camp that's a cluster. So you got two camps and a hunk of red zone right in the middle. And so we had to cross over all the time. And we would just cross over in the regular military gate because we don't need to be searched because we're the good guys. This new unit's like your contractors. You have to go through the contractor gate. We're like, oh, no, hold on. You have to understand what we do around here. Number one, we have top secret courier orders. I don't got to do anything you say. So, but we're not going to do that. We're going to be nice. And he's like, well, you're not going to come through in a civilian vehicle. So we grab a vehicle, which happened, by the way, to be from the 165th, my unit when I was in the Army. And I'm like, holy shit, I know who this person was because their name was still in the window. That's kind of funny. And we drove across in a Humvee, and that guy saw us, and it was a major. And he took issue with it. He's like, what are you doing? How are you in a military vehicle? Like, well, you said to not come across in a civilian vehicle, so we came across in a military vehicle. We thought problem was solved. You still want us to go through the contractor gate. I'm still going to say to you, like, this is what we do. We are counterintelligence people. We are trying to, we can't be exposed. We're trying to help you sort these guys out. We can't be in there. And it took forever to get through the contractor gate because it was all contractors,
Right.
the Iraqis and everything else. And so it got to the problem where we had a problem we no longer could solve, and we had to go to both camps to do our job. And so it was my relationship. So I was talking to him, and I'm like, look, this isn't going to end well. I will elevate this. Understand we're a core asset. We're here to help you guys, and we're desperate to do that. But if I have to elevate this, understand where I'm elevating to. I'm not going to someone at battalion. I'm not going to someone. I'm going to someone at core. So can we figure out some way to make this so we have special access? Whatever you need from us. Do you need to do an interview? Do you need, because we'll be the guys that interview ourselves, you know. And man, this major would not take an answer. And I'm like, okay, so the next thing I'm going to do, and I told him, I'm going to call core, and I'm going to call the person who's in charge of all the human in this theater, and I'm going to let him know that we have to go across the red zone. He's not going to like that. And he told me, do whatever the fuck you want. So I did. And I called the C2X, and he's like, I'll be on the next thing smoking. And because he's the C2X, he was there about as fast as you could be. And he wasn't hurrying, but just because he has the kind of authority. And the next time I saw that major, he was crying. And he's like, why did you do that to me? You know?
I gave you
I was
your
like, well, yeah, I gave you all these outs. I asked you 3 different ways. And so this is the thing, like, you have to learn how to work within these organizations. You also, sometimes you get fired, sometimes, you know, because you're going to be a maverick a lot. But all of that goes into what we have to master before we, and I'm talking about us. I'm not talking about them, you know? And so we have a lot of things to figure out. I'll say one more thing and I'll shut up. I was training, when I was at Huachuca, I was training O1s, O2s, O3s, and they'd be like, Pete, go stand out in the field and help them. And so they would show up to me and they'd say, what are you? I'm a counterintelligence agent. I had my little trip light system, and I'd show them how to work the computer, the chats system. And I showed them how to work the computer thing. Yeah. And they'd go, but where do I put you in the line of battle? Okay. And these are intel officers, right? You're like order battle. Like, are you guys by the Turkey 32? Like, no, I'm in the cafe in front of and behind you. I'm nowhere near where you guys are because I've got to be talking to everybody else. And if I'm good, I'm in front of you and I'm showing you what's out in front of you. And these guys, again, intel officers, had no idea what that was. So that's why I say all this stuff to anybody watching. If you're going to be a counter intel person, understand that all of these things are out there. So you have to figure them out. All right, Ken, I talked a lot. Sorry about that. Go ahead and go.
So, you know, oftentimes the greatest barrier to doing our job, and oftentimes who, unfortunately, I viewed sometimes more as the enemy than fists, was our own people. And I'll give you an example, and this may have been a guy you trained at some point in time, but I got this brand new second lieutenant, and he got assigned to ride with me on a vehicle surveillance in the military district of Washington. And at the time, we used to support out of 902nd the Joint Military Attaché School for all these majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels that were going to go around the world to these different embassies. And we would teach them counter surveillance. And we would do this by starting off real loose and sloppy and letting them figure us out and pick us up. Yep. And by the end, when they were getting ready to graduate, we were running full speed on our surveillance, which was great practice for us to do it. So I get this brand new second lieutenant sitting in the right seat as I'm driving. He doesn't know the freeways or the parkways or anything in Washington. And I'm listening all day to, when I run this unit, we're going to do this. When I run this unit, we're going to do that. You're going to wear uniforms when you're not in, in the field. You're going to do that. And finally, we were sitting someplace and I'd had enough, and I turned to him and I said, sir, when you went through that class that got you your badge and credentials, you were taught to employ the weapon system. I am the weapon system.
Right.
And, I never, ever quite got over the fact that these officers would go through a 4 or 6 week abbreviated course and get the same B's and C's that we got after going through almost 6 months of training. The CID always separated out, and the officers had different badges. It said CID supervisor on it instead of CID special agent. Right. So oftentimes they could be our own worst enemy, because the military mindset, and it's drilled into them. It's not anything that's a personality flaw.
Right.
Is, like you said, line and block chart. Where does this person fit into this scheme? And how can I control that person? And I think I have 2 anecdotes from my career that probably best sum that up. The first one, I was in Bosnia, and I was sitting at an outdoor cafe. And as you know, a lot of times with these guys, to get them to talk, you had to take a drink with them. They drank. I've always been a lightweight. I'm not a drinker. So we'd leave the gate, and I'd find I knew of a bakery, and I'd go get a baguette, and I would just fill my stomach full of bread. And my Dutch partner, Fred, was about a 6'5", 300-pound former Dutch Marine. It was now a OR 7 or OR 8 or 9 in the Dutch Army, a very experienced agent. he could drink anybody under the table. So I can remember sitting at this cafe, and we'd always, had the excuse, I can have my one drink with you, because they didn't trust you if you didn't. Of course, General Order 1's in effect, no drinking alcohol.
Right.
Uh, and so I would take that first shot of rakia with them, thankful that my stomach was full of bread, and say, as the driver, our rules say I'm the driver, I can only have one drink. So we're sitting there, and Fred's getting him drunk, and to get more information out of him. And this U.S. convoy starts going by. And back then, of course, we're wearing BDUs.
Yep.
And we look, the Americans are the ones in BDUs. You could look and see who.
Yeah.
And this Humvee pulls out of the line of the convoy going by, and comes to this screeching stop in front of the cafe. And the second lieutenant jumps up and points at me, and you're violating General Order number 1. And he just starts laying into me in front of my Dutch partner and this Bosnian Serb police chief. And I'm sitting there going, okay, how am I going to salvage this? I don't want to lose face in front of this guy. And so I get him around the corner of the building, and I reach in my, my thigh pocket, and I pull out my B's and C's. And, even at that point, most people in the Army never see counter.
Never seen them. Yeah.
They have no idea what it is. They have no idea what the word enjoined means, which is no longer on the new credentials. We had a class on what enjoined means.
Yeah. You will enjoy.
Yeah, you are enjoined to provide all support. So anyways, I pull these out, and I put him in his face. And of course, I have no rank on my uniform. I have somebody else's name on it. And I'm like, LT, you got about 30 seconds to unask my AOR, or you're going to be under arrest for interfering with a federal investigation. And he's looking at me, looking down at the creds, looking at me, looking down at the creds, and tucks his tail between his legs and goes scurrying off and jumps his Humvee and pulls out. I sat back down and had more bona fides now, because I sent him scurrying with his tail running. And this police chief says, this guy's got some juice to him. And he turned that situation around.
Yeah.
The second situation, which was, just absurd, but shows how big Army does not understand the mission or the job, is we were operating up in the ports. We had an office at the Port of Rotterdam, and we're all the way up at about the 1130 position, the exit to the North Sea. We're using the precious metals port, because it has the best security to start with, so we're pushing 2 divisions out through here, and we wanted to start with some decent wire and security. And I'd been up there for months, and again, how liaison pays off. I start doing liaison with this lieutenant from the Dutch Port Police, and he's like, where are you living? And this is before anything set up, and I'm staying in this little hotel. It's where the merchant marines get off their ships and meet girls in the bar and take them back to this hotel. I mean, it's seedy. It's a pretty seedy hotel. And this lieutenant from the port police says, no, that won't do. And so at about the 9 o'clock position in the port was the Royal Dutch Shell Refinery and headquarters, huge multinational Shell oil. And they had built a Four Seasons hotel to support their executives and their people coming in to their headquarters. So this is this 5-star hotel,
right?
And this port police lieutenant takes me there, and I'm like, "Hey, LT, I can't afford this. I mean, I got $50 a day for my per diem." And he says, "Well, don't worry about it." He walks in, straight past the front desk, walks into the manager's office, says, "This is my very good friend. You're going to give him a room for as long as he wants, and he's got $50 a week or a day to pay for it, and you're going to include breakfast." So here I am, living in the Four Seasons hotel, for almost a year. So fast forward a couple months, and things are going. They've built up the port, and we've got an office there, and I'm sharing the office with 2 reserve MP captains, who are a captain and major, acting as the provost's marshal for the port operations, and a CID warrant officer 2, who is up there doing counter drug smuggling, county smuggling operations to keep them from smuggling stuff out of Europe to go down to the sandbox. And one day, this transportation corps lieutenant colonel, that's the battalion commander, and she basically is in charge of this port, walks into our office, and points at the CID chief and me, who by this time I had the CID chief living in the Four Seasons also, and says, you're moving into my life support activity today. So they'd built this tent city with double stacked container walls of the shipping containers as a perimeter. And, I was a senior NCO at the time. Of course, she didn't know my exact rank. He was a warrant officer, probably didn't know his exact rank either. And I'm looking at him and it's like, dude, you got the bars on your shoulder. You play first. And he looked at her and said, with all due respect, ma'am, I don't work for you.
Yeah.
In for a penny, in for a pound. All due respect, ma'am, I don't work for you either.
Yeah.
Well, you're going to move in there and blah, blah, blah. And he looks at her and goes, what am I going to do with my gun while I'm in the shower? And she's like, what gun? And pulls back his jacket. And she looks at me and I pull back my jacket. And I said, ma'am, I've had a safe professionally installed in my hotel room. I have a classified laptop. I had a chat system. Who's going to guard this stuff for me when I'm in and out? I said, also, ma'am, I don't want people monitoring when I go in and out, my comings and goings.
Yeah.
They're really not anybody's business. And she said, well, we'll see about that. And she
we will.
Like, all right. And the MP major and the MP captain look over at us like, you guys shouldn't have talked to her like that. Very conventional Army thinkers, straight line. So about 10, 15 minutes later, we get the phone rings, the MP major answers and said, they want you over in the SPO's office. Well, the SPO was the Single Port Operations Officer Europe. He was a professor at the Merchant Marine Academy, called to active duty. He was an 06, full bird.
Yes.
And he was commanding all 3 Northern European ports out of Rotterdam. He was there in the middle, the same reason I was, because it was in the middle of the 3. And he calls us over to his office and looks at the two of us, says, gentlemen, I understand you don't want to move into the colonel's LSA. Yes, sir. Why is that? And we sort of gave the same reasons. And without us prompting, we're saying this to him. He looked up at her and says, with all due respect, Colonel, these men don't work for you. He said, if anything, they work for me. Well, we weren't going to argue with him that we don't work for him either because we were winning. At the time. Yeah. And she gets in a huff and she storms out. And you said you were in a transportation unit. I was never overly fond about transportation corps officers. They weren't the cream of the crop from what I'd seen in the Army. Yeah. And the SPO looked up at us and said, gentlemen, if I were you, I'd avoid her for a while. Yes, sir. And he said, come over here. He'd just gotten his coins in and he slapped them into our hands and his SPO Europe coins. And, again, it sort of summarizes what you said of these barriers that regular Army sometimes wants to throw because they are uncomfortable outside the orthodoxy of what a TO&E looks like for a unit. And if you don't fit into that nice little block on the chart and they understand what influence they can exert over you, it makes them uncomfortable. So the agent has to live in that world of ambiguity and do 2 things. One, make a decision when you stand up for yourself and when you flex and do it. And at the same time, be willing to say, this does not support my mission. I'm just going to let this one go. I'm going to let it pass over my head. And that's a skill that comes with maturity. That's a skill that comes with having been put in bad situations. And it's a skill that you can't teach the young agent at the schoolhouse.
No. And I don't want to take too much of your time, but this is so good. And I just want that next agent to possibly hear this. I was, again, at my peak. I was great at collecting, multi-degree black belt, and I'm out. I'm doing the job. I'm doing all kinds of great things. And, the thing about these situations is it feels good to the ego to win these fights, but more importantly, like, how do you avoid them in the first place? Really is the real answer. Anyhow, so I knew that ag teams in Iraq or in Afghanistan, and Iraq too, were problems. So I focused there because the boss wants to know where the needles are. Hey, your ag team is fucking up your mission. And it's not that they're trying to, it's just, it's very hard to succeed. And if they're being told, hey, this is winning right here. And then I go back, I'm like, wow, I talked to 15 farmers in that area. You're not winning, you're losing. They want to know that. And so this ag colonel had written this long email kind of bashing the person I was partnered with, and he was a governor. And we had decided to make this governor the governor. We were going to get out of his way. He had said this brilliant thing. He had said, there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. Am I the sword? And I went back to the boss, and the boss is like, he's absolutely the sword. We're all taking 2 steps back. We're going to follow his lead because that's what we wanted. We wanted him to be a governor, and he was willing finally we got out of his way. And so we're going to do a wheat seed distro, and everybody's so like, I've been through the wheat seed distro thing 100 times. I knew where we were screwed it up. And so I would try just like, let's just do it less shitty, right? This doesn't sound like intel work, but I'm helping the commander know how to drive his unit better. I'm helping him win more and lose less in this case. And this full colonel, who's an ag guy, writes all this stuff about how fucked up the governor is, right? And we just spent all these months trying to get him to stick his head out and go, all right, I'll lead, And now this guy's going to create this negative perception. So I wasn't having it. And so I hammered back, bam, bam. Because by the way, I'm the guy on the fucking ground. He knows about this guy because of me. And so I hit him, bam, 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 bam. He didn't like that. He got mad and he grabbed everybody. The DCO was also a colonel. They're peers, but he works directly for the boss. And so he's the influencer to the boss. And he's like, I want that Turner guy gone. I don't want him here. Look what he wrote about me. Because I started my email with, unlike Colonel so-and-so, and went on down, right? And that's kind of a mistake, but not really. What that colonel should have had is tough skin and said, I got to get Turner here, find out what's going on. And he should have known that. He didn't. And so thankfully, my boss has a gigantic ass. Not for real, but like he could take a chewing. And so the DCO is chewing him out. And by the way, we're Department of Army people. So we're still kind of within the structure where like, we got to listen to this guy. It's their show. And he barks and barks and barks at my boss, Todd. And then he's like, I hear everything you're saying, sir. You probably he shouldn't have wrote those words at the beginning of the email. I will send him home. You show me where in his response where he was wrong. And the DCO was like, fuck. And he had to leave because the things I wrote were right. Because I was the guy telling him this stuff. And, and then the lower commander's like, yeah, you're not sending Pete home. No way. And so the 06 had told the other 06 he was going to send me home. And then they had to sort that. That's colonel business. So they had to sort that out. But I should never have to go through all that, right? No. Yes, it's risky. Yes, I'm going to make mistakes. Yes, sometimes we get drunk and we get caught being drunk. Whether it was legitimate or not. Yes, we're a problem. Yes. There's a lot of black area that we work in that we're comfortable in and you all aren't. But that's the whole thing is like, I don't do your job. I do my job and my job looks terrifying to you. Guess what? My job is dangerous. But if you don't let me do my job, I can't go meet the people that you all can't meet. Because I loved, Cam, one of my favorite things was populating that silhouette of, we don't know who this guy is, nor do we know his name. We just know he exists. And I'm like, you need those.
Lanu.
Yeah, exactly. Lanu. Last name unknown. Like where I was, I'd like, show me the last time we had a Shura, and I'm going to show you that there are chairs that aren't filled. They're there out of respect for their peers, but they don't sit in them. Do you know who those 12 people are? No, I'm like, I'll have them. I'll meet all of them in the next couple of months. Yeah. But you have to let me get off this camp, and not to be dangerous, not to be reckless, but to get access. I am the placement in the access in this case. So here's what I need, right? Don't get in my way. Anyhow, I wanted to say that because it adds to the thing you're talking about. And there's plenty of times when it did not go my way and I got fired, I got sent home, I got kicked off of camps, so it doesn't always happen. And you have to learn how to dance that dance, and it is not comfortable. But if you are a boss, you've got to be able to say, you are not touching my CI guys. They're going to be working. They're going to work directly for the boss, and you guys are going to be amazed at the information but they're not going to drive around on details. They're not going to be on guard duty. They're not going to do all these things. What they're going to do is their damn job. Get out of the way.
You said something real interesting. And for any young CI guy that ends up watching this and wants to know what the job's about and what's important. And it's not about, doing a brush pass of information. It's not about servicing a dead drop. Those things happen.
Right. Yeah.
We have to understand that spycraft. We have to understand how to counter it. We have to understand how to do it. But earlier I spoke about being able to tell my commander what the effect was going to be if the price of bread doubled.
Right.
You just talked about what the effect or what are the potential ramifications of a wheat seed distribution. How many times in the course did we ever hear about wheat seed distributions, the price of bread? But these are real world issues that real commanders are having to deal with. And us as CI guys have to understand that and be able to support it in a way to support their decision making further down the road.
Right.
It's incredible to think, again, we are human intelligence assets. Yes, we have to understand and counter all the other things. Yes, we have to do this, that, and the other. But We have to understand what's important to the human beings outside the wire,
Yep.
because the effects it has on them is going to be the effects it has on the force and the ability to carry out that mission.
Mm,
And if it comes down to the price of bread, if it comes down to the availability of wheat seed, then that becomes important to us. We can't say that's not a military, that's not order of battle, that's
right.
not identifying and filling out that silhouette of whose fists, who's on, what are our black, white, and gray book list of names. um, CI has to adapt to what's going on, and it has to be able to be mature enough to assess what is important, not only to our commander that he knows about and writes a PIR that we're trying to action, or write an overarching PIR that's something that's always on our mind. We have to tell him, this should be important to you, sir, because
Yeah.
this is what's going to happen next. And I find that as something that I thought was lacking over the years, and something that conventionality and thinking people start to lose.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, run this show back different direction and all different topics come up because
Sure.
that's how varied this job is. We could totally go in a different direction. I want to thank you, man. I really I had high hopes for this and you've exceeded my hopes and really have done a great job. I can't wait to chat with you again. Hope we can do another one of these. Definitely want to get together face to face at some point, whether it's at a reunion thing or whatever. But I really dig how you see the job, and there's a lot for us to learn from each other, and hopefully to show to other people in our field, so that we can see, like, God damn, this is an incredible job. It's incredibly hard, incredibly complex, and dangerous. But look at what you can do when you get access to real ground truth experience.
Sure. And before I go, just, if you let me make a plug, having a fantastic
Please.
weekend, the Army Counterintelligence Special Agents Association, it's only been around for about 3 years now. We had our first reunion and convention last weekend. Anybody that's ever been in the job, anybody that's currently in the job, go to that website, look at it. There's a lot of unclassified postings that people will find fascinating. There's a lot of historical documents and after action reviews, like that Black Swan incident I told you about with this counter surveillance or the surveillance ambush that was done on agents, that people can learn from. But that goes back to where we started early on, getting the word out. What does this job do? What's this job all about? Who are these quiet professionals that have been the guardians of and protectors of the U.S. Army and our secrets for all these years? And it's a chance for you to learn and go forward. I'm fascinated by what the counterintelligence police did in World War I. I'm fascinated about what the counterintelligence corps did throughout World War II. We had agents that performed incredible feats during Vietnam. We had female agents that were awarded high medals and high honors for their combat actions during the Tet Offensive. And then we had a group of guys that after Vietnam, we sort of lived in the wilderness for a long time and laid the groundwork and prepared for what subsequently came after 9/11 and what we're seeing today, and fought to get CI back to the place it belongs to be, which I think it's well down the path to do. So thanks for posting that, Pete. Thanks for having me
Yeah.
on. Look forward to having more conversations and further supporting our brothers and sisters that are, still at the tip of the spear, still carrying out that mission, still putting
Yeah.
themselves at risk every day.
Yeah, thank you to all those folks. Again, dangerous, crazy, complex job, and I'm excited for it. Actually, I know a new agent about to get graduated tomorrow, and I was hoping I was going to be able to get out to him. I'm not, but anybody who's in the CI field, even if you're current, go check that out. If you need, just email me, and I'll get you in the door, and we'll figure out how to best help you. And there's a lot of help available in general. So, Pete at breakitdownshow.com, or just go to this right here and just sign up. You'll figure it out. Again, Ken, thank you. Let me hang up on this. I'll see you all tomorrow with a great show. And Ken, I'll say goodbye to you in a sec. Thank you, everybody. Make sure you click and subscribe.